Good evening, and welcome to a special Project Ravenwind presentation of two paranormal stories that are very close to my heart and my brain. The first one I'll relay occurred back in the winter of 2005-2006, while I was having my first winter visit home from undergrad. And the second is a retelling of perhaps the best ghost story I've ever heard from a first-hand witness. So of course I'm relaying it third hand at this point, but I believe that you'll enjoy it nonetheless. Let me begin with my own adventure and my own experience with the paranormal. When I was a kid, I was really big into pretty much anything paranormal: cryptids, ghosts, UFOs, extraterrestrials, kind of all over the board on that type of stuff. I was almost a walking, talking encyclopedia of UFO encounters, going as far back as the modern UFO era, starting in the 1940s. And I was very deeply involved in ghost hunting and other practices like that at that point in my life. To be honest, I actually have never witnessed a ghost that I'm aware of, nor have I ever seen a UFO that I'm truly aware of. I have occasionally seen some unusual things in the sky that I will brush off as probably a meteor, maybe a drone at one point, but certainly nothing that I could say is paranormal. Except for this one particular encounter that I had with some friends during the coldest and windiest day of the year, back in, I believe it was probably early January 2006, or perhaps late December 2005. As I mentioned, I was home back in northern Illinois at the time, visiting family and visiting friends on my first winter vacation outside of the university that I was attending at that point. We had decided, I believe there was 5, maybe 6 of us, to go out on this coldest, windiest day of the year. And of course we dressed up in the manner befitting that. Like, I kind of looked like a spaceman, all my head and face really deeply recessed under multiple layers of hats, gloves, like a face mask type thing, all the way underneath this really thick hood for this really thick jacket that I was wearing. And I had multiple jackets on at that point too. Anyway, we decided to walk from my friend's home in his subdivision through some woods and part of this kind of partially developed and partially underdeveloped area near his subdivision. We traveled across a couple cornfields. I remember specifically that we at one point stopped in this little dugout between cornfields, and we kind of just let the wind and the snow and the drifting, basically crash over us as we huddled down in this little, almost like a bunker, almost like a trench type thing. And we debated at that point whether or not we were going to continue all the way into the woods. Of course we did. After crossing another long cornfield, we eventually made it into some woods where, naturally, due to the natural barriers of the woods, the snow and the blowing and drifting and just the winds in general kind of subsided enough where we could, undo like maybe one layer or so, and actually be able to look around and turn our heads, because we were wearing so many layers that we seriously had a hard time, turning and moving. This helped, of course, as we went deeper and deeper into the woods, hopping over down tree limbs. We crossed, I believe, at least 2 creeks at this point. Obviously, they were frozen, but it wasn't that cold for that long, so we were a little concerned, especially with the wider, deeper creek, just stepping on the ice. So after a couple of tries, we eventually found a place where we felt that we could cross safely. Nothing too remarkable on this expedition. We were just, basically grab-assing and joking around and doing what, 5 dudes do in the forest when they're, in their early 20s, late teens. And eventually, we just kind of came across this area where we realized we could no longer hear or feel any wind at all. And it really wasn't a place you would think the wind would stop because there wasn't much canopy. All the canopy was dead at this point. There weren't that many tall trees or branches to kind of muffle and shut down the wind. And, we could see in the distance that there was still blowing and drifting and, in general, like snowfall in general. And we were kind of alarmed by that, but we didn't even realize how long we'd been traveling in this clearing, this area where there just wasn't wind for some time. And we decided just to keep going because although we thought it was a little odd, but we didn't think anything enough to actually turn back. Eventually, we came across an area of this clearing deep in these woods where there was very little snow on the actual ground, and the ambient air temperature was significantly warmer, enough where there was actually a very thin layer of fog or mist on top of that snow. And this is when we started getting kind of freaked out because there was just no way possibly for there to be this big of a temperature differential when it was, we are really talking, like minus 10 Fahrenheit, and then the wind chills probably were pushing it, close to negative 30, maybe negative 35. And that's what we walked out into. And there's no way that, we're talking maybe 35 degrees at this point to actually get like a little bit of a layer of fog or mist going on top of a relatively thin, not crunchy, not icy layer of snow at this point. Again, in stark contrast to the rest of the snow that we walked through to get there, which was this very powdery, very light, and at some places kind of like a thick icy layer where it just doubly froze on top. Anyhow, we kept on going and deeper into these woods. And, once again, the woods actually got quite a bit thicker, and it started making a little bit more sense why at least we couldn't hear the wind at this point. We were still walking through a bunch of dead leaves and things like that. It was thick enough where, we were really pushing branches away from our face and heads and kind of ducking and dipping along this path that we were on. Eventually, we came to another clearing, and that's when things got pretty darn spooky again. In this clearing, there were no fewer than 3 tents, and each of these tents had been collapsed. The metal poles were actually bent, and part of it was collapsed either in the back or the front, or the side was sort of toppled over. And in at least 2 of these tents, there were really big, long, deep rips on the side of them. And there were 3 of them, 3 actual big, long, grooved rips in the tent fabric itself on the side of them. And inside were sleeping bags that looked like they got shredded by Freddy Krueger. We're talking about like the stuffing and stuff all coming up on end, also gouged by seemingly 3 very long. We weren't sure if they were claws or not, or some sort of knife damage or something like that. We were becoming quite alarmed at this because we just didn't know what we came across here. We didn't really find any blood or any trace that anyone had been here recently, but we did find a whole bunch of kids' toys. I remember distinctly there being a yellow and orange Fisher-Price like junior shopping cart type toy there. And there were a bunch of dolls and action figures, and every doll and every action figure and every stuffed animal toy like that, all of them were missing their heads. Every action figure, no head. Every doll, no head. Every stuffed animal, the head was ripped off and stuffing was coming out the top of it. And we had no idea where the heads were. We looked around. There was nothing around that indicated where the heads would be. At that point, we decided to leave. We were pretty alarmed, and we actually kind of felt like we may need to tell somebody about a pretty significant encampment with a number of tents that looked like were under attack by something, and or somebody was living there that was clearly stealing toys from somewhere and decapitating them. Either way, it was a bunch of weird things that just started cropping, that just kind of cropped up, and we were like, okay, we're good, let's go. And that's as we started walking home, single file back down the trail. We were kind of looking over each other's shoulders. We were about maybe anywhere from 6 to maybe 12 feet apart in a single file row. And I remember being somewhere in the middle. So I wasn't at the front, I wasn't at the back, but I think I was the third, maybe the fourth person in line. And I remember as we were going back through this trail and dipping and dodging and ducking underneath the branches and stuff through the thickest part of those woods, two of them, my friends, ran up behind me and tagged me and kept on running faster and faster, even though they were, basically getting caught up by the branches and stuff overhead. They told me that they had seen a black hooded figure behind us or in the woods beside us. I don't recall which they specifically said. I looked around left and right, but then I just bolted with them. I did not want to be left holding the check on this one, and of course, as we all caught up with each other, we tapped the 2 or 3 guys ahead of us on the shoulder, and they started running with us, and we ran and we ran and we ran and we ran back until we basically could see the snow falling and drifting and blowing again, and felt really, really cold. Now, we didn't really talk about it that much that same night, but we kind of had a feeling like we had to go back. We had to take pictures or something like that with our phones or with our digital cameras to prove what was going on there, and potentially tell the authorities about it, because that's just all kinds of weird. And we even though it was blowing and drifting, we were able to find the groove of our trail in the snow that we took from the subdivision across the farm fields. We found the little trench that we took cover in for a bit. We walked past that. We walked over the 2 creeks. We found our trail after both creeks again. And we found our trail right until the edge of the part of the woods where we started noticing there wasn't any wind. And we found our trail, and we found a place where it simply ended. There was our trail, and there was more woods that looked a lot more snowy, and we could hear the wind, we could hear the breeze and stuff. It wasn't as windy the next day or as cold the next day as it was the previous day, but we could still hear some wind. It was still pretty cold. And we found the place where our tracks just simply ended. And of course they were ending, running back towards the way that we came, because that's the last time we came through that area. And yeah, we never were able to pick up our trail again, and we, despite continuing down the same path, we never found any of the markers or, of course, the campsite or any of the misty areas again anywhere in that direction. And we did that again the day after we found it the first time, and we took at least 2 trips out there in the spring trying to find it again, and we never could. And I don't know what exactly we ran into, and I will not claim to have seen the said hooded figure, but every now and then I still talk with these 4 or 5 other guys who went out there with us that day, and we always talk about this incident, where it always kind of comes back to talking about it and just being kind of sharing a couple beers over it and just kind of laughing it off, because we don't know. None of us had ever seen anything like that, and none of us had ever seen anything like it again. And yeah, that is my sole paranormal encounter that I have had personally. Now, my second story, again, I will credit to a roommate that I had back in, I want to say, somewhere between 2011 and 2013. I'd have to kind of check on exactly when that was, but that was when I was living with her and her domestic partner at the time. strange point in my life. A lot of things were in flux at that time, and I remember very specifically us having a scary story night, and we were, of course, getting pretty hammered on a. It was either a Friday or Saturday night as we did. We got pretty close, the three of us, and at one point in the midst of telling scary stories, this particular story came out from my friend, and I am telling it now, some 8 years later, and I haven't had it retold from the person who actually experienced this for a while now, so it is possible that I'm exaggerating or adding things possibly, but the gist of the story is this. Several years ago from then, her and her father had moved out to rural Oklahoma and were leasing a house out there. It was a small ranch house with a very, kind of small roof attic type thing out that way. And, they were really excited about it. They had a really cool floor plan, and they had seen a lot of good pictures of it online. And, they had all set and ready to move in, start their various jobs out there that they had recently gotten. When they moved into the house, they were in for quite a shock. There was a large section of the ceiling that had been cut out over part of the kitchen, part of the bathroom, and mostly over one of the bedrooms. That was just cut out and missing on what looked, straight up into the attic. And there were no lights or anything on in the attic or anything like that. It was just a kind of a dark, dank, spooky attic, as attics usually are. And I guess in a coin flip or something like that, my friend had lost the bet to her father, and she had to end up with the room with the hole in the ceiling. Well, that's all kind of creepy and well and good, because they tried to patch up the hole in the ceiling first with drywall, so drywall, spackle, tape, stuff like that, and some anchor nails and stuff like that. And I guess each time they did that, the nails and the screws weren't taking hold, and the drywall tape never set right, and the drywall spackle never set right, and they just couldn't get it covered with their kind of usual, let's patch the ceiling with drywall and drywall screws. And, they were pretty annoyed at that point, so, they'd contacted the leasing agent at that point, and they were like, well, this is just how it is right now. There's something ongoing. We can't really communicate very well with you. And then it was kind of radio silence. And, several more angry emails went out later. And then they were just kind of back to like, okay, well, how are we going to patch this thing up? And eventually they went with just some cardboard and duct tape patching the ceiling and stuff like that. And I guess no matter what they did, the cardboard and duct tape just wouldn't stay up. It kept on falling down. It would fall down, while they were both at work. And I think at this point, my friend was actually employed by a small university or community college out that way. So they'd always come home and it would be just down on the floor. And it's around this time, after the second attempt, that they really started to notice some pretty standard kind of poltergeist or kind of haunting activity in the house. TVs would flip on and off by themselves. The phone would ring and there would be no one on the other end. Things are being misplaced in the house, especially keys of cars and things like that. And occasionally somebody would hear the voice of a young girl playing or laughing or something in the house like that. And, for a while, she told me that they had kind of just played this off as if it were a prank that each of them were playing on each other, and they really didn't want to discuss the implications, and they both just kind of went along with, oh, you must have put the keys on top of the microwave, even though I left them on the table, and you must have left the TV on last night again, and stuff like that. But in reality, she was pretty alarmed by it, and she started to, think about ways of, any other way to patch that hole in the ceiling, because it was really unnerving to look up from her bed each night and just see a pitch black hole there, and she always felt like she was being watched by something up just at the edge of that hole in the ceiling. So eventually she just got a poster. I think she said it was a Green Day poster, and she tacked it up there with the silly tack and some push pins. And she recalled one night in the middle of the night, there wasn't a thunderstorm or there wasn't a weather system moving through or anything like that, but she recalled that just suddenly some big gust of air pushed the poster just straight down, like somebody was punching from the ceiling on down, and it knocked all the push pins and all the sticky tack off and ripped the poster, and it just fluttered down to her bed. And it scared the crap out of her. And after that, they decided no more messing with the hole. She just rearranged her room entirely so that basically the only way that she could see any of the hole was if maybe she turned off her television, and maybe she could see a corner of it in the reflection, and pretty much adjusted everything else in her room just so that she didn't have to look at it as much as she used to. So the haunting stuff kind of went on. They didn't do anything else with the hole. They had been there, I think, a couple months at this point, and she had a boyfriend at the time. And this is when everything really, really kicked into high gear. In particular, one evening, I guess she was getting physical with her boyfriend, and in the midst of that, she had glanced at the television screen and had seen in the reflection a large male figure wielding a large axe. So on the other side of her bed, on the other side of her room, she's just started screaming her head off and crying and freaking out, and her boyfriend thought like he must be doing a good job or something, and he wasn't quite getting it, and I guess she grabbed his head and made him look at the screen. He said he saw the same thing. They both turned around, quit what they were doing exactly, and turned around, and of course there's nobody in the room with them. There's no one else even in the house with them. No axes, nothing like that. Apparently this disturbed the boyfriend so much that he refused to come over to the house anymore, and they broke up soon after that. So now with all this, fresh new time that she had on her hands, I guess she went down to the library or something like that and started pulling up some old newspaper articles about the house or anything she could find about the house. And she found out that before they had moved in, the previous persons leasing the house was a father and daughter pair. And the father went nuts and killed his daughter with an axe. And he hid the body up in the attic. And in one of the ways that the leasing agent and then the investigators found out about it is that her blood seeped into the drywall over the attic, and the reason why that drywall wasn't there and that hole in the ceiling was there was because they cut it down because of all the blood and all the rot from her body. So, knowing that, they tried to get out of the lease, but I guess they couldn't, and they did eventually figure out a way to fix the ceiling, but they were pretty adamant about getting out of there as soon as possible because the haunting, especially with the noise, with the little girl laughing, just didn't stop. Anyhow, that was probably the scariest ghost story that I'd heard from anybody in a long time. And those are the two personal paranormal stories that either happened to me or have heard secondhand and have just always been wowed by. And I hope that this horror satiates you for a time until I can return to curating stories from the internet for you and turning them into new Project Ravenwind stories that I will share here. Thank you for listening. I hope that you are comfortably sheltering in place, in some place that is safe, and I hope that the circumstances find you safe and healthy. In time, I hope to be offering a collection of Project Ravenwind marked items, including hoodies, t-shirts, hats, and stickers. And I hope that you will be interested in purchasing some to show around town, and that you can then share this story and other stories that are on Project Ravenwind with your friends and your family. In these trying times, I personally wish you good luck, safety, and health.